The ship had no name that any enemy would ever hear. On its hull, painted in dull gray that ate light instead of reflecting it, was only a number, UEV-119. But the crew called her the Requiem, because she had been built for a mission that most people on Earth believed would end in silence. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge and watched the last stars of the Milky Way shrink behind her ship. She was 41 years old, with short black hair and tired eyes that had not slept well in 3 days. Around her, the bridge crew worked quietly. There was no music playing, no chatter. The Requiem was a dark ship, built to slip through space without being seen, heard, or felt. Even the voices of her own crew were kept low, as if sound itself might give them away. "Captain," said Lieutenant Marcus Webb, the ship's young navigator, "we are 5 minutes from the threshold." Sarah nodded. "Bring us to full stealth." The lights on the bridge dimmed to almost nothing. The engines, which ran on a strange new kind of dark energy that Earth scientists barely understood themselves, went quiet, in a way that felt wrong to anyone who had grown up on normal starships. There was no hum, no vibration, just a heavy stillness, like the ship was holding its breath. The Requiem was not the first ship Earth had built. It was the first ship of its kind. For the past 20 years, since humanity had made first contact with 3 friendly alien species near the edge of known space, Earth had learned one hard lesson again and again. The galaxy was full of eyes, and most of those eyes did not like what they saw when they looked at Earth. Humans were new. Humans were unpredictable. Humans had a habit of surviving things that should have killed them. That made other species nervous, and nervous species sometimes attacked first and asked questions never. So Earth had built the Requiem in secret, in a shipyard hidden inside a hollowed-out asteroid, using every scrap of forbidden knowledge stolen, traded, or invented since first contact. The ship's entire purpose was to see without being seen. It carried no lasers, no missiles, no shields that could be detected by outside sensors. Its only weapon was silence, and its mission, chosen by a committee of tired old men and women in a bunker under Geneva, was simple to say and terrifying to do. Fly across the empty void between galaxies, enter the neighboring galaxy that every other spacefaring species called the Dead Reach, and find out why it was dead. No radio signal had ever come from that galaxy. No light from stars flickered in patterns that suggested cities or ships. Telescopes from a dozen different alien worlds had studied it for centuries and agreed on only one thing: it should not be empty. Star formation there had continued normally for billions of years. Life should have risen there just as it had everywhere else. But something had ended it all, and ended it so completely that even the wreckage seemed to have vanished. Every species that Earth had met so far refused to send a ship there. Not out of laziness, but out of fear. The kind of fear that comes from very old stories parents tell their children to keep them away from something. Humans, still young enough in the galaxy to not fully believe the old stories, had volunteered instead. Some said it was brave. Others, quietly, said it was foolish. Sarah Chen did not know which one was true. She only knew that her orders were clear, and she intended to carry them out. "Threshold in 10 seconds, Marcus said. The threshold was not a physical door. It was a term the science team had invented for the exact point where the gravitational pull of the Milky Way ended, and the true emptiness between galaxies began. Past that point, there would be no help, no rescue, no way to call home and expect an answer within a human lifetime. The Requiem carried enough supplies for a 2-year mission, but if anything went wrong out there, no one back home would even know until the ship failed to report on schedule years later. 5, 4, 3. Sarah gripped the armrest of her chair. 2, 1. The Requiem crossed the threshold. For a moment, nothing seemed different. The stars outside the viewport did not vanish or change, but something on the ship's sensors did change. The background hum of gravity that every ship in a galaxy always feels, that gentle tug from billions of stars pulling in every direction, faded. It did not disappear completely, but it grew thin, like a blanket pulled too tight to cover a bed. The ship was now in the space between galaxies, a place where distances were measured not in light years, but in millions of light years, and where nothing but the Requiem's own engines kept it moving forward. "We are clear of the Milky Way's gravitational influence," said Dr. Amara Okafor, the ship's chief scientist, reading from her console. She was a small woman with a calm voice, the kind of voice that made bad news sound manageable. All systems nominal. Dark drive stable. Time to the dead reach? Sarah asked. At current speed, 11 months, Amara said. If we push the drive to its safe limit, we can cut that to 9 months and 12 days. Push it, Sarah said. But watch the drive temperature. I don't want to arrive at a dead galaxy in a dead ship. Amara allowed herself a small smile. Understood, Captain. The months that followed were long and quiet. Life on the Requiem settled into a careful rhythm. There were 42 crew members aboard, each one hand-picked not just for skill, but for the ability to stay calm during long stretches of nothing happening. They ran drills. They studied old data sent by alien allies about the edges of the dead reach, data that was thin and full of guesses. They ate their meals together in a small mess hall, told jokes to keep spirits up, and watched old movies from Earth projected onto the wall. Movies that felt more precious with each passing week, because they were the last living connection to home. Marcus Webb, the navigator, kept a journal. He wrote about the strange feeling of being farther from any living thing than any human being had ever been before. He wrote about how the stars outside looked different this far out, dimmer, more scattered, like the last dying embers of a great fire. He wrote, more than once, about being afraid, and then crossed it out, because he did not want anyone to read it if something happened to him. Dr. Okafor spent her days studying every scrap of information available about the dead reach. She built models, ran simulations, argued with the ship's AI about probabilities. The AI, a calm synthetic mind the crew had nicknamed Whisper because of its soft, careful voice, ran endless calculations trying to predict what they might find. Every model came back the same way, inconclusive. There simply was not enough information. Whatever had happened in that galaxy, it had happened so long ago, and so completely, that even the AI's best guesses were closer to stories than science. If I had to guess, Amara said one evening, sharing a meal with Sarah and Marcus in the mostly empty mess hall, I would say it was a war. A very old, very total war. The kind that does not just kill soldiers, but kills the idea of civilization itself. Or a plague, Marcus offered. Something that spread faster than anyone could stop it. Or something we don't have a word for yet, Sarah said quietly, and the other two fell silent, because that was the answer. None of them wanted to think about too hard. 9 months and 12 days after crossing the threshold, Whisper's voice came over the ship's speakers, calm as always, but carrying a weight that made every crew member on the bridge sit up straight. Captain, we are entering the outer edge of the Dead Reach galaxy. Sensor range is now picking up the first star systems. Sarah stood. Bring the main view screen online. Full stealth protocols remain active. The screen flickered to life, showing the deep black of space, slowly filling with points of light. Stars. Ordinary stars, burning the way stars always burned, unaware and uncaring of whatever history surrounded them. For a moment, it almost looked normal. Then Amara's voice, careful and controlled, cut through the quiet. Captain, I am reading planetary systems around several of these stars. Rocky worlds. Gas giants. All in expected positions for their stars. This is a normal, healthy galaxy in terms of its physical structure. And life signs? Sarah asked. There was a pause, a long one. None, Amara said. No radio noise. No artificial light on any of the planetary surfaces we can scan. No orbital debris. No satellites. No ships. Nothing. It is exactly as the old reports described. A galaxy built for life, with none of it left. The Requiem moved deeper into the Dead Reach over the following weeks, drifting from star system to star system, like a ghost exploring a graveyard. Each new system told the same silent story. Planets that should have held cities were empty. Some worlds even had atmospheres that looked like they had once supported life, oxygen levels that no purely natural process could explain, and yet nothing moved on their surfaces. No lights at night, no radio chatter, no ships in orbit. Not even wrecked ones. That last detail bothered Sarah more than anything else. Wars left wreckage. Plagues left cities. Empty but standing. Whatever had happened here had not just killed the people of this galaxy. It had erased almost every trace that they had ever existed at all. Almost every trace, not all. It was Amara who found the first clue, deep in the sensor logs after weeks of quiet scanning. A single planet, orbiting a small red star, near what the crew had started calling the Ashfall Cluster, showed something unusual. Buried under kilometers of rock and soil, there was a structure. Metal. Artificial. Old beyond imagining, but still intact. "Captain," Amara said, calling Sarah to the science lab, "I think we found something they left behind." Sarah looked at the readings on the screen. A shape, buried deep, roughly the size of a small city, giving off the faintest trace of residual energy. Not active, not powered, but not entirely dead either, like a heart that had stopped beating, but had not yet gone fully cold. "Can we get a closer look without exposing ourselves?" Sarah asked. "We can send a small stealth probe," Amara said. "Passive sensors only, no active scans, no transmissions. It would take 3 days to reach the surface and return." Sarah thought about it for a long moment, looking at the strange, buried shape on the screen. Everything about this mission had been about staying hidden, staying quiet, staying safe, but they had traveled across the void between galaxies for exactly this reason, to find an answer. And here, finally, was the first sign that an answer might exist. "Send the probe," she said, quietly. 3 days later, the probe reached the surface of the dead world and began its slow descent through layers of rock toward the buried structure. The crew of the Requiem gathered in the science lab, watching the data stream in bit by bit, each new reading a small piece of a puzzle none of them yet understood. What the probe found, in the end, was not a weapon, or a tomb, or a city. It was a vault, a message left behind by a civilization that had known, somehow, that it was going to die, and had wanted whatever came after them to understand why. Inside the vault, protected by walls thick enough to survive whatever had ended their world, were recordings. Thousands of them, stored in a format the Requiem's computers struggled to translate at first, but slowly, painfully, began to decode. The first recording that Whisper managed to fully translate showed a being that was not quite human, but not entirely alien either, tall and thin, with skin like pale stone, and eyes that seemed to hold a great weight of sadness. It spoke in a language that sounded like wind moving through metal pipes, and as the ship's AI worked to translate the words, the crew of the Requiem leaned forward in their seats, waiting. "To whoever finds this," Whisper translated, its calm voice now carrying an edge that none of the crew had heard before, "Know that we did not fail because we were weak. We failed because we were not ready. It came from the dark between the stars, where nothing should live, and it did not come to conquer. It came to consume. If you are hearing this, you have entered a graveyard. Leave quietly, leave quickly, and pray that it has forgotten this place, because if it has not, then you have already been seen." The recording ended. The lab fell silent. Sarah looked at the frozen image of the alien speaker, its stone face still and sad, and felt a cold weight settle in her chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the ship. "Whisper," she said slowly, "run a full sensor sweep, passive only. I want to know if anything in this system has changed since we arrived." There was a pause, longer than usual, before the AI responded. "Captain," Whisper said, "I am detecting something. A gravitational disturbance, far beyond the range of our normal sensors, moving in our general direction. It was not there when we entered this system. It appeared 11 minutes ago." Marcus's voice came from the bridge, tight and controlled. "Captain, whatever that message was warning us about, I don't think it forgot this place." Sarah stood very still for a moment, looking at the dead, silent world on the screen, and at the tiny, moving point of disturbance far in the distance, drawing slowly, steadily closer. "All hands," she said quietly. "Prepare for silent running. We are leaving this system, now." But even as she gave the order, she knew, deep down, that the Requiem's arrival in the dead reach had already changed something. Somewhere out in that vast, empty galaxy, something ancient had noticed them, and it was no longer alone in noticing. Far beyond the edge of human sensors, scattered across 1,000 hidden corners of the dead galaxy, other eyes had noticed the Requiem too, eyes that belonged to the last survivors of a civilization that had spent centuries in hiding, waiting, praying for a miracle. They had just seen one arrive, and they were not going to let it leave without them. The Requiem pulled away from the dead world at the highest speed her stealth systems could handle, without breaking silent running. On the bridge, Sarah Chen watched the gravitational disturbance on the sensor display, a faint smudge of moving light on an otherwise black screen, and tried to decide whether it was chasing them or simply passing by. "Whisper, distance to the disturbance?" she asked. 800,000 kilometers and closing, the AI answered. "Speed is difficult to calculate exactly. It does not move like a ship. There is no consistent engine signature, no drive trail, no exhaust. It simply moves, the way a shadow moves across the ground when a cloud passes overhead." Marcus turned in his chair, his face pale. "That's not possible. Nothing moves through space without leaving some kind of signature." "I did not say it was impossible," Whisper replied calmly. "I said it is difficult to calculate." Sarah kept her voice steady, though her heart was pounding. "Options. We could continue running silent," Amara said from the science station. "Our stealth systems are designed to hide us from active sensors and most passive scans. If that thing does not know exactly where we are, we may be able to slip away." "And if it does know exactly where we are?" Sarah asked. Amara did not answer right away. None of them wanted to say the obvious thing out loud, that if the ancient recording had been telling the truth, if this thing had already seen them once, then hiding might no longer be an option. "Bring us about," Sarah finally said. "New heading, away from the disturbance. Best possible stealth speed. Whisper, keep tracking it. I want updates every 30 seconds." The Requiem turned slowly, gracefully, like a fish changing direction in dark water, and began moving away from the buried vault and the dead world that held it. For the better part of an hour, the bridge crew watched the sensor display in tense silence, as the disturbance seemed to drift, first closer, then farther, then closer again, never quite matching a pattern that made sense. Then, without warning, it stopped. "Whisper?" Sarah asked. "The disturbance has ceased forward movement," the AI reported. "It is holding position at approximately 600,000 kilometers from our current location. Is it still tracking us? Unknown. There is no way to be certain without active scanning, which would reveal our position." Sarah let out a slow breath. For now, at least, they had put some distance between themselves and whatever was out there. But the message from the vault echoed in her mind, over and over. It did not come to conquer. It came to consume. And now, whatever it was, it had stopped moving, as if it were waiting, or listening, or simply no longer interested. Whichever it was, Sarah knew they had learned as much as they safely could from this system. It was time to move on, carefully, and try to find someone still alive in this galaxy who could tell them more. 3 weeks later, drifting quietly through a cluster of stars near the far edge of what the old star charts called the Ashfall cluster, the Requiem's passive sensors picked up something that made every member of the science team stop what they were doing. A signal. Weak, encrypted, clearly artificial, and clearly not meant to be found. "It's a tight beam transmission," Amara said, her voice rising with excitement she had not allowed herself to feel in months. "Extremely narrow, extremely short range. Whoever sent this did not want it detected by anything that was not standing directly in its path. We only caught the very edge of it." "Can we trace the source?" Sarah asked. "Not exactly, but we can narrow it down. It's coming from a system about 4 light-years from our current position, a gas giant with several moons." Sarah looked at the star chart on the main screen, at the small, unremarkable system Amara had highlighted. After a full year of silence, of dead worlds and empty skies, the idea that something out there was alive enough to send even a whisper of a message felt almost too good to be true. "Set a course," she said. "Slow, careful, full stealth. I want to know who is still out here." It took 11 days of careful, silent travel to reach the gas giant system. When the Requiem finally arrived, drifting into the outer edge of the system with every sensor set to passive only, the crew found something that none of them had expected. Hidden among the moons of the gas giant, tucked into the shadow of a massive ring system that blocked most outside scans, was a fleet. Not a large one, not by the standards of a full civilization, but large enough to take Sarah's breath away. Several hundred ships, of all shapes and sizes, some clearly built for war, and others clearly built for carrying refugees, floated together in careful formation, their engines dimmed, their lights turned off, hiding in the shadow of the rings, the same way the Requiem hid in the darkness of space. They're doing exactly what we're doing, Marcus said quietly, staring at the screen. They're hiding. From what? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. It took 2 more days of careful, one-sided observation before the hidden fleet noticed the Requiem at all. When they did, it was not with weapons or aggression, but with a single, careful transmission, sent on a frequency close enough to the Requiem's own systems that Whisper was able to catch and translate it almost immediately. Unknown vessel, the message said, translated into a calm, careful human voice by the ship's AI. You are trespassing in protected space. Identify yourselves, or we will be forced to assume you are a threat. Sarah looked at her crew. Every face on the bridge was tense, waiting for her decision. First contact with a new species was always dangerous, and doing it in the middle of a dead galaxy, with an unknown horror somewhere out in the dark, made it feel even more dangerous than usual. But she had come here to find answers, and hiding forever would never give her any. Whisper, she said. Open a channel. Translate for me. Channel open, Captain. This is Captain Sarah Chen, of the Earthship Requiem, she said slowly and clearly. We are explorers from a galaxy far from here. We mean you no harm. We came because we wanted to understand what happened to this place. There was a long pause after the message was sent, long enough that Sarah began to wonder if she had made a mistake. Then the reply came, and this time, the voice that Whisper translated carried something Sarah had not expected. Disbelief, and beneath it, something that sounded almost like hope. You came from outside, the voice said, from beyond the dark. That should not be possible. No ship has crossed the void between galaxies and returned in living memory. We built a new kind of ship, Sarah said carefully, designed for the crossing. We did not know what we would find here. We only knew that this galaxy had gone silent, and we wanted to know why. Another long pause. Then, slowly, the hidden fleet's lights began to brighten, just slightly, as if some of the ships were choosing, cautiously, to reveal themselves. My name is Threll, the voice said. I speak for what remains of my people, the Kalin. We are the last organized fleet of our kind in this galaxy. If you have truly come from outside, then you may be the first outsiders to see us in 300 years. And if you are willing to listen, Captain Chen, we have a story to tell you. A terrible one, but you deserve to hear it, since you have already come so far. Sarah felt Amara's eyes on her, felt the tension of the entire bridge crew waiting for her next words. She thought of the vault, and the sad stone face of the recording, and the words it had left behind. It came to consume. We're listening, Sarah said quietly. What Threll told them, over the following days, was a story more terrible than anything the crew of the Requiem had imagined. 300 years ago, by the Kalin's reckoning, their galaxy had been full of life. Dozens of great civilizations, trillions of individuals, thousands of years of history and art and science, all thriving together in a fragile, imperfect peace. Then it had come. No one knew where from. No one knew what to call it, except the name that had spread across every world in terror, the Hollow. It was not a single creature, not a fleet, not an army in any way that made sense to normal minds. It was something that consumed not just matter, but meaning, unmaking entire worlds so completely that even the memory of them faded from the minds of those who had known them. The Kalin and their allied species had fought back with everything they had, fleets larger than anything Earth had ever built, weapons that could crack planets in half. None of it had mattered. The Hollow could not be reasoned with, could not be bargained with, and worst of all, could barely even be fought, because it did not fight the way normal enemies fought. It simply arrived, and then, slowly, the world it arrived at simply stopped existing, and eventually, so did the memory of it. We do not know if the Hollow is alive in the way you or I are alive, Threll said, his stone face heavy with old grief, as Whisper translated his words. We do not know if it thinks, or plans, or hates. We only know that wherever it appears, life ends, and it has appeared everywhere in this galaxy, one system at a time, for 3 centuries. We are what is left, a few hundred ships, hiding in the dark, moving from shadow to shadow, trying to survive long enough to find some way to escape a galaxy that has become a grave. Sarah sat in silence for a long moment after the translation finished, feeling the weight of Threll's words settle over the entire bridge. She thought of the buried vault, and the message inside it. She thought of the strange disturbance that had noticed them near the dead world, the one that moved without leaving a trail, and with a growing, cold certainty, she understood. The disturbance we detected, she said slowly. Near the vault world, that was the hollow. There was a pause on the other end of the channel, and when Threll spoke again, his voice carried something new. Fear. You encountered it, and it saw you? We believe so, Sarah said. Then it is worse than I feared, Threll said, because if it noticed you, Captain Chen, it noticed something new, something from outside this galaxy, and the hollow has never, in 300 years, shown interest in anything old. It has only ever grown more curious about anything new. The words hung in the air of the bridge like a held breath. Sarah looked at her crew, at Amara's worried face, at Marcus gripping the edge of his console, and felt the full weight of what they had stumbled into settle over her shoulders. They had not just found the survivors of a dead galaxy's slow murder. They had, without meaning to, drawn the attention of the thing responsible for it. And somewhere out in the vast, dark galaxy, that attention was now, slowly, patiently, beginning to turn toward the one thing it had never encountered before, a ship from somewhere else entirely. Threll's voice returned, quieter now, more urgent. Captain Chen, I must ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Your ship crossed the void between galaxies. Does that mean you know a way to cross it again? A way back to wherever you came from? Sarah hesitated only a moment before answering. Yes, we do. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the channel. When Threll spoke again, his voice trembled with something that was not quite hope, and not quite desperation, but a painful mixture of both. Then I must ask you for something. No proud commander should ever have to ask a stranger, he said. Please, take us with you. Take all of us. We have nowhere left to hide, and the Hollow has just noticed something new in its Garden of the Dead. It will come for you, Captain Chen. And when it does, it will come for anyone standing near you as well. Sarah looked out at the view screen, at the hundreds of hidden ships drifting quietly in the shadow of the gas giant's rings, and thought of the millions of lives those ships might carry, and of the vast, ancient horror that might already be turning its attention their way. She thought of Earth, small and unaware, on the other side of an unimaginable distance, still believing this mission was only about answering a scientific question. And she understood, with a growing sense of dread, that whatever answer she gave next was about to change everything. Sarah did not answer Threll right away. She muted the channel and turned to her bridge crew, her mind racing through every possible outcome of the decision in front of her. Talk to me, she said. All of you. Fast. Amara spoke first. If even half of what Threll says is true, that thing, the Hollow, has already noticed us. Running from it might not even be possible, but leading a fleet of alien refugees back through the void, back to Earth's doorstep, that's not a decision any of us can make alone. That's a decision for Earth's government. Earth's government is 9 months away by fast courier drone, Marcus said. We don't have time to wait for a committee to argue about this. I know, Sarah said quietly. Whisper's calm voice cut through the tension. Captain, may I offer an observation? Go ahead. The Requiem was built for exactly this kind of decision. Not the specific situation, but the principle behind it. Earth did not send a committee across the void. Earth sent a captain, and trusted her judgment, because a committee cannot react in real time to something no one has ever seen before. You have the authority to make this call. That is why you hold this rank. Sarah looked at the muted channel, at Threll's ship glowing softly in the shadow of the rings, and thought about the trust that had been placed in her, and the trust that Threll and his people were now placing in a species they had known for less than a week. She unmuted the channel. Threll, she said, I need to understand something first. If we agree to guide you back to our galaxy, what exactly are we bringing with us? How many ships? How many people? Threll's voice returned, careful, honest. Our fleet numbers just over 400 vessels here in this system, but Captain Chen, we are not the only survivors. Word travels slowly and carefully among the hidden fleets of this galaxy, but it does travel. If it becomes known that a path exists out of this dying galaxy, every hidden group, every scattered remnant that has learned to survive by hiding from the Hollow, will want to follow. I cannot promise you it will only be 400 ships. It could be thousands. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. Thousands of alien ships, following a human vessel back to the doorstep of Earth. It sounded, on the surface, like the beginning of every nightmare scenario Earth's military planners had ever wargamed. An armada of unknown origin, arriving without warning, claiming to be refugees. It would terrify people. It might even start a war before anyone had a chance to explain. But the alternative was leaving these people here, to be slowly, patiently erased by something that did not even seem to hate them, that simply consumed without malice, the way fire consumes wood without hating the tree. Marcus, she said, run the numbers. If we open a return path and thousands of ships follow us, what happens to our own return timeline? Marcus's fingers moved quickly over his console. The return path itself doesn't change based on how many ships use it, Captain. We opened the corridor when we crossed into this galaxy. In theory, any ship close enough to our wake when we begin our return trip could follow the same path, the same way a smaller boat can follow in the wake of a larger one crossing rough water. But the timing has to be precise. If ships are too far from our wake when we begin, they'll be lost in open space between galaxies, with no way to navigate back. Then we need to give them time to gather, Sarah said. And we need to make sure every ship following us understands exactly how narrow that window will be. Threll's voice returned, quieter now, thick with an emotion that needed no translation. Captain Chen, I do not have the words in your language, or mine, to properly thank you. But I must warn you as well. Gathering a fleet of that size will take time, and time is the one thing we may not have. If the Hollow noticed your ship, it will not simply forget. It moves slowly, but it moves with purpose, and it does not stop. How much time do we have? Sarah asked. I do not know, Threll admitted. No one does. The Hollow has never behaved the same way twice, but I would not wait longer than we must. Over the following month, the Requiem became the center of a desperate, careful gathering. Word spread slowly through hidden channels and careful courier ships, the same way rumors of hope spread through any desperate population, carefully, cautiously, but unstoppably once they began. Threll's fleet of 400 grew to 600 within 2 weeks, then to over 1,000 within a month, as scattered groups from every corner of the dead galaxy made their way, quietly and carefully, toward the gathering point near the gas giant's rings. Sarah watched the numbers grow with a mixture of hope and dread. Every new ship that arrived meant more lives that might be saved. It also meant a larger, more visible gathering, one that would be far harder to hide from anything searching for them, whether that something was the Hollow or simply bad luck. Amara spent long hours in the science lab, working with Threll's own scientists, comparing notes on the little that was known about the Hollow. What emerged from those conversations painted a picture even more unsettling than the crew had first understood. It doesn't use ships, not in any way we understand, Amara explained to Sarah one evening, tired lines showing under her eyes. Threll's people have never actually seen the Hollow directly, and survived to describe it clearly. Every account is second-hand, filtered through terror and static. But the pattern is consistent. It appears as a kind of spreading absence. Areas where it has been simply become quieter, then emptier, then eventually forgotten, as if reality itself loses interest in remembering they existed. That's not a weapon, Sarah said quietly. That's an idea of an ending. Maybe, Amara said. Or maybe it's simpler than that, and we're just afraid to think about it plainly. Maybe it's a process, like erosion, or entropy, except aimed with some kind of intention we don't understand yet. Whatever it is, Threll's people have spent 300 years learning exactly one useful thing about it. It can be avoided, for a time, by staying hidden, staying quiet, and staying away from wherever it has recently focused its attention. And we just gave it something new to focus on, Sarah said. Amara did not answer, because there was nothing comforting left to say. 6 weeks after Sarah's first conversation with Threll, the gathered fleet numbered just over 3,000 ships, a staggering collection of vessels from a dozen different species and cultures, some magnificent and gleaming despite their age, others little more than patched-together survival craft that looked as if they might fall apart at the first sign of stress. Among them floated the last living memories of civilizations that Earth had never even known existed, carried by survivors who had spent generations learning how to vanish. It was Whisper who first detected the change. "Captain," the AI said, its calm voice carrying a new tension that made Sarah's blood run cold. "I am picking up a disturbance similar to the one we detected near the Vault World. It is much larger this time, and it is closer." "How much closer?" Sarah demanded, already moving to the command chair. 3 light-years in closing. Based on its previous movement patterns, I estimate it will reach this system within 9 to 12 days. The bridge fell silent. 9 to 12 days was not enough time to gather every hidden fleet that had promised to come. It was, however, enough time to gather what they already had and prepare a departure. Sarah opened a channel to every ship in the gathered fleet, her voice steady even as her heart pounded in her chest. "This is Captain Chen of the Requiem, speaking to all ships gathered here. The Hollow is moving toward this system. We believe it will arrive within 9 to 12 days. I know many of you have been waiting for others still on their way. I wish we had more time to wait for them. We do not. In 6 days, the Requiem will begin its return journey to my home galaxy. Any ship that can reach our departure point in time is welcome to follow in our wake. Any ship that cannot make it in time will be left behind. And I am sorry, more sorry than I have words for, that this is the choice in front of us." The response that came back, from ship after ship, species after species, was not anger or panic, but a kind of weary, practiced acceptance that broke Sarah's heart more than any outburst could have. These were people who had lived under the shadow of an unstoppable ending for 300 years. They knew, better than any human ever could, what it meant to make impossible choices quickly and move on. Threll's voice came last, quiet and steady. 6 days, Captain Chen. We will be ready." The next 6 days passed in a blur of frantic preparation. More ships arrived, some limping in on damaged engines, having pushed themselves to their absolute limits to reach the gathering point in time. Others farther away sent final messages of farewell and thanks, knowing they would not make it, choosing instead to scatter and hide once more, hoping the Hollow's attention would remain fixed on the larger, more visible fleet, rather than turning toward them. On the 6th day, with the Hollow's disturbance now clearly visible on every ship's sensors, a vast spreading wrongness against the black of space, Sarah gave the order. "Whisper. Begin return sequence. Every ship, follow our wake exactly. No deviations." The Requiem's engines, silent for so long, began to hum with a low, steady power, unlike anything the crew had felt since they first crossed the threshold nearly a year and a half earlier. Around them, thousands of alien ships fell into careful formation, following the Darkship's lead like a vast, silent school of fish, fleeing before a predator, too large and too strange to fully comprehend. Behind them, the disturbance that was the Hollow surged forward, no longer slow, no longer patient, as if it had finally understood exactly what it was about to lose. "Captain," Marcus said, his voice tight. "It's accelerating. It knows we're leaving." "Then we leave faster," Sarah said. "Whisper, take us to the threshold." Full power. The Requiem surged forward, its stolen alien engines burning brighter than they were ever designed to, leading a fleet of 3,000 desperate ships away from a dying galaxy and toward a threshold that would carry them home, with something vast and ancient and hungry closing the distance behind them with every passing second. Sarah gripped the arms of her command chair, watching the growing wrongness on the view screen, and prayed, in a way she had not prayed since she was a child, that whatever waited for them on the other side of that threshold would be ready for what was about to arrive. The threshold crossing did not feel the same the second time. When the Requiem had first left the Milky Way, it had been a quiet, almost gentle transition, the gravitational hum of home fading slowly behind them. This time, it felt like tearing through something that did not want to let go. Sarah felt it in her bones before Whisper even reported it. A deep shudder that ran through the entire ship as they crossed back into the gravitational influence of their home galaxy. Behind them, on the sensor display, 3,000 alien ships followed in a ragged, desperate line, and behind them, closer than Sarah wanted to admit, the spreading wrongness of the Hollow surged through the same gap in space. "Report!" Sarah snapped. "We have crossed the threshold," Whisper said. "All following ships have successfully made the transition. Casualties among the fleet, 41 vessels lost during the crossing, likely due to structural failure under the strain of following our wake at extreme speed." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. 41 ships, gone. Just like that, after everything they had survived to get this far. but 3,000 had made it. 3,000 ships full of people who, an hour ago, had believed they were living out the final days of their entire civilization. "And the hollow?" she asked, though she already dreaded the answer. "Unknown," Whisper said. "Sensors detected the disturbance entering the threshold behind us, but the exact nature of its crossing is unclear. It does not appear to require a ship, a drive, or any conventional means of travel. I cannot confirm whether it followed us successfully, or whether the threshold crossing disrupted it in some way." "Keep watching," Sarah said. "I want to know the moment anything changes." Marcus turned from his console, his face pale but focused. "Captain, we're deep in Milky Way space now. Based on our position, we're still almost 8 months from Earth at standard cruising speed." "Then we don't cruise," Sarah said. "Whisper. Get a message out immediately. Full priority. Encrypted on every channel Earth Fleet Command will recognize. I want them to know exactly what's coming before it arrives." The message that left the Requiem that day, racing ahead of the ship and its enormous following of alien vessels, would later be remembered as one of the most important transmissions in human history. It was short, direct, and utterly without the careful diplomatic language that usually surrounded first contact reports. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the UEV-19 Requiem. Mission successful in confirming cause of the Dead Reach galaxy's destruction. We are returning with approximately 3,000 refugee vessels from multiple alien civilizations, fleeing an entity responsible for the death of their entire galaxy. We believe this entity may have followed us through the threshold crossing. Recommend immediate defensive posture across all Earth fleet assets, but urge extreme caution against treating the following fleet as hostile. These are refugees, not invaders. Full report to follow. God help us all." It took 8 months for the message to reach Earth by fast courier drone, arriving just under 2 months before the Requiem itself, along with its vast trailing fleet, would reach the edge of the Sol system. Those 2 months, back on Earth, were some of the most chaotic in the history of Earth Fleet Command. Admiral Diane Torres, commander of Earth's Combined Defense Fleet, received the message in the middle of a routine briefing and read it twice before setting it down on the table in front of her, her hands steady out of long habit, even as her mind raced. 3,000 ships, she said quietly to the officers gathered around her. "Following one of ours, out of a dead galaxy, with something behind them that might have wiped out an entire civilization. It could be a trap," said General Okonkwo, the fleet's chief strategist, a cautious man who had spent his career preparing for worst-case scenarios. "An elaborate one. We've seen species use false refugee stories before to gain sympathy and access. We've also seen species tell the truth and get shot for it, because someone assumed the worst," Torres said. "Captain Chen's report is clear. She believes these are refugees. I trust her judgment. She's the one who was actually out there. And if she's wrong," Okonkwo pressed, 3,000 unknown ships arriving at Earth's doorstep is not a small risk to gamble on one captain's judgment, however skilled she may be." Torres looked around the room at the tense faces of her officers, then back down at the message on the table. "We prepare for both possibilities," she finally said. "Full fleet mobilization, defensive positions across the outer system. But no one fires first unless fired upon. If these are truly refugees, fleeing something that destroyed an entire galaxy, then Earth just became the only safe harbor left for thousands of survivors. That is not a responsibility we can afford to get wrong out of fear." Over the following weeks, Earth's fleet mobilized in a way it never had before. Every warship, every defense platform, every armed vessel humanity possessed, moved into position around the outer edges of the Sol system, forming a vast, watchful perimeter. News of the approaching fleet, despite every effort to keep it contained, began to leak to the public, and panic spread through Earth's cities like wildfire. Some people prepared for an alien invasion, stockpiling supplies and building shelters. Others held vigils, praying for whatever was coming to be peaceful. Governments argued, media outlets speculated wildly, and through it all, humanity waited, watching the sky, for the return of a ship that had left over a year and a half earlier, on a mission that had never been fully explained to the public. Aboard the Requiem, Sarah spent much of the final approach in constant communication with Threll and the leaders of the other refugee fleets, trying to prepare them for what they would find at the end of their journey. "Earth is not united in the way you might expect," she explained during one long conversation, translated carefully by Whisper. We have one government that speaks for the whole planet in matters like this, but our people are diverse, and many will be afraid when they see your fleet. I need you to understand that fear does not mean hatred, it only means uncertainty. We understand fear better than most, Captain Chen, Threll replied. We have lived inside it for 300 years. We do not ask for a warm welcome. We only ask for a chance to explain ourselves before any weapons are fired. That chance is exactly what I intend to give you, Sarah said. 2 weeks before the fleet's arrival at the edge of the Sol system, Whisper's voice broke through the tense quiet of the bridge with news that made Sarah's stomach drop. Captain, I am detecting a disturbance matching the signature of the Hollow. It is trailing the refugee fleet at a distance of approximately 2 light-years and appears to be slowly closing that gap. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. It followed us, all this way. It appears so, Whisper confirmed. Based on its rate of closure, I estimate it will reach the outer edge of the Sol system, approximately 3 to 4 weeks after our own arrival. Sarah immediately opened a priority channel to Earth, her voice tight with urgency. Fleet Command, this is Captain Chen. I need to update my previous report. The entity responsible for the destruction of the Dead Reach galaxy has followed our fleet across the threshold and is currently trailing us towards Sol space. Current estimate places its arrival at 3 to 4 weeks after our own. Recommend all defensive preparations account for this timeline. This is no longer a hypothetical threat. It is a confirmed pursuit. The message reached Earth Fleet Command like a bomb going off in a quiet room. Admiral Torres called an emergency session with every senior officer, every scientist who had studied the Requiem's original mission data, and representatives from every allied alien species Earth had contact with, hoping desperately that someone, somewhere, might have encountered something like the Hollow before, and survived to describe how. No one had. The Hollow, whatever it truly was, appeared to be entirely unknown outside the borders of the Dead Reach galaxy, a horror so effective at erasing its victims that even knowledge of its existence had apparently never spread beyond the dying survivors who fled it. We are facing something with no known weaknesses, no known limitations, and no known way to communicate with it, Torres told the assembled officers and scientists, her voice grim but steady. We have 3,000 refugee ships arriving in a matter of weeks, exhausted and low on resources, and an unknown horror trailing not far behind them that may have already destroyed an entire galaxy's worth of civilizations. I want every scientist in this room working around the clock. I want every warship we have ready for a fight none of us fully understand, and I want Captain Chen's fleet welcomed, not as a threat, but as allies. Because if there is one thing I am certain of, it is this. We are not facing this alone anymore, and that might be the only advantage we have. 3 weeks later, the Requiem finally crossed into the outer edge of the Sol system, leading behind it a vast, weary fleet of 3,000 alien ships from a dozen different civilizations, gathered together not by conquest or alliance, but by the simple, desperate need to survive. Ahead of them, arrayed in careful, watchful formation, waited the assembled might of Earth's entire defense fleet, weapons armed but silent, waiting to see what kind of welcome the moment truly called for. And somewhere behind the refugee fleet, drawing closer with every passing day, came the vast, spreading wrongness of the Hollow, following the only thing it had found interesting in 300 years of quiet, patient consumption. Something new. Sarah stood on the bridge of the Requiem, watching the lights of Earth's fleet come into view on the view screen, and felt, for the first time since crossing that first threshold so long ago, a strange and fragile hope. They had made it home. They had brought thousands of desperate survivors with them, and now, whatever came next, they would not face it alone. But she also knew, with a certainty that settled cold and heavy in her chest, that the true test had not yet begun. The Hollow was still coming, and this time, it would arrive not at some distant dying galaxy no one back home had ever heard of, but at the very doorstep of humanity's home. The first meeting between Earth's fleet and the refugee ships did not happen with weapons or speeches. It happened quietly, almost gently, as the Requiem led the exhausted alien fleet past the outer defense line and into the relative safety of the inner Sol system, while Earth's warships held their formation, watching, ready, but holding their fire. Admiral Torres herself came aboard the Requiem in a small shuttle, meeting Sarah Chen in person for the first time in almost 2 years. She looked older than Sarah remembered, the weight of command showing clearly in the lines around her eyes, but her handshake was firm and steady. "You look tired, Captain," Torres said. "I feel about 1,000 years old, Admiral," Sarah admitted, "but we made it, all of us." "Not all of you," Torres said gently, glancing at the reports already filed about the ships lost during the crossing, "but more than anyone back here expected." Over the following days, with Torres's direct authorization, representatives from Earth met formally with Threll and the leaders of the other refugee species for the first time. It was, by any measure, an unusual first contact. There was no time for the slow, careful diplomatic dance that usually accompanied meetings between new civilizations. There was only a shared, urgent need to prepare for what was coming. Threll stood before a gathering of Earth's senior military and scientific leadership, translated by whisper, his stone face calm, but his voice carrying the weight of 3 centuries of loss. "I understand your fear," he said. "I have lived with fear, as a constant companion, for longer than most of your people have been alive. But I ask you to understand something in return. We did not come here to take anything from you. We came here because Captain Chen offered us the one thing we had given up hoping for, a chance to survive. Whatever help we can offer in the fight to come, we will offer freely, because we understand better than anyone what is at stake if we fail." Admiral Torres studied him carefully. "And what can you offer exactly? Your fleet is battered, your ships are old, and by your own reports, most of you have been running and hiding for generations rather than fighting." "That is true," Threll admitted. "But in 300 years of hiding, we learned things about the Hollow that no one else in the universe knows. We know how it moves. We know the subtle signs that come before it fully arrives somewhere. We know, better than anyone alive, how to recognize the shape of the thing that is coming for you. That knowledge may be worth more than any weapon we could offer." Over the following weeks, as the Hollow's approach continued steadily through the outer reaches of the solar system, a strange and unprecedented alliance began to form. Human scientists worked side by side with scientists from a dozen alien species, comparing notes, building models, trying desperately to find some weakness, some pattern, some hope, in the small amount of data anyone had ever gathered about the thing now bearing down on them. It was Dr. Amara Okafor, working late into the night with a Kaelin scientist named Voss, who first noticed something that had been overlooked in 300 years of terrified observation. "Every account we have of the Hollow's approach describes it the same way," Amara said, presenting her findings to a packed briefing room aboard one of Earth's largest command stations. "A spreading quiet, a growing absence, but no one ever asked what happens to the energy of everything it consumes. Matter cannot simply disappear without a trace, not according to any physics we understand. It has to go somewhere." "You think it's storing something," Torres said slowly. "I think it's converting something," Amara said. "Every world it has ever consumed, every civilization erased, that is an enormous amount of matter and energy that has to exist in some form, somewhere. I believe the Hollow itself might be less like a creature, and more like a process, one that requires an increasingly large amount of raw material to sustain itself as it grows. And if that's true, then it may have a very specific, very exploitable weakness." "Which is?" General Okonkwo asked. "It needs to consume constantly to maintain whatever process is happening inside it," Amara said. "If we can disrupt that process, even briefly, there may be a moment of instability we can exploit. A moment when it is vulnerable in a way it has never been before. Because in 300 years, nothing has ever tried to interrupt it mid-consumption. Everything it encountered simply let itself be consumed, because nothing knew there was another option." The room fell silent, as the implications settled over everyone present. It was not a plan built on certainty. It was a plan built on a single, desperate hope, backed by careful science, and the combined knowledge of a dozen desperate, exhausted civilizations, who had never before had the resources or the allies to even attempt such a thing. "We'll need everything we have," Torres finally said. "Every ship, human and refugee alike. And we'll need to move fast, because that thing is not going to wait for us to finish our theories." The Hollow reached the edge of the Sol system 11 days later, and for the first time, humanity saw with its own sensors and its own eyes exactly what the Kaelin and their fellow refugees had spent 3 centuries fleeing. It did not look like a ship, or a creature, or even a cloud of matter in any conventional sense. It looked, instead, like a tear in the fabric of ordinary space. A spreading darkness that swallowed the light of distant stars, not by blocking it, but by somehow making that light simply cease to have ever existed at all. Sensors struggled to even properly measure its size, because the space around it seemed to shrink and expand in ways that defied normal physics. "All fleets, this is Admiral Torres," came the transmission across every human and allied channel. "Hold formation. We are executing the Okafor protocol. On my mark, every ship will focus fire on the coordinates provided by the science team, simultaneously, using every weapon system available. This is not about destroying it in one blow. This is about disrupting whatever internal process is keeping it stable." Whisper, Requiem. Confirmed targeting data is synchronized across the entire fleet. "Targeting data confirmed and synchronized," Whisper reported. "All 3,211 Allied vessels are ready to fire on your mark, Admiral." Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Requiem, watching the vast, spreading wrongness of the hollow fill the view screen, and felt Threll's presence beside her, the Kalen commander having insisted on being aboard the human flagship for this final, desperate gambit. "Whatever happens next," Threll said quietly, "I want you to know that my people do not consider this a burden forced upon us. We consider it a chance we never thought we would have, a chance to finally fight back, instead of simply running." "We're all fighting together now," Sarah said. "That's the only way this works." Admiral Torres's voice rang out across every channel, steady and clear despite the impossible enormity of what they were about to attempt. "All fleets, fire on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark." Every warship in the combined fleet, human and alien alike, opened fire simultaneously. A coordinated storm of energy weapons, kinetic strikes, and experimental technologies that had never before been used together, all focused on a single set of coordinates deep within the spreading darkness of the hollow. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. The darkness continued to spread, unaffected, as if the combined might of an entire star system's defense fleet meant nothing at all to it. Then, deep within the wrongness, something flickered. "Contact," Whisper reported, its calm voice unable to fully hide the tension in its synthesized tone. "I am detecting a disruption in the entity's structure. Captain, whatever Dr. Okafor's theory predicted, it appears to be correct. The hollow is exhibiting instability." "Fire again," Torres's voice rang out. "All ships, continue firing on the same coordinates. Do not let up." The combined fleet fired again and again, pouring everything they had into that single point of instability, and slowly, painfully, the vast spreading darkness of the hollow began to shrink, contracting inward like a wound closing, fighting against the disruption, with a force that shook every ship nearby, with waves of strange, unnatural energy. Sarah gripped the arms of her command chair, as the Requiem shuddered under the strain, watching the view screen, as the ancient horror that had destroyed an entire galaxy fought for its existence, against the combined might of humanity, and the last survivors of its own countless victims. "It's not enough," Amara's voice came through, tight with fear, from the science station. "The instability is stabilizing again. It's adapting." "Then we adapt faster," Sarah said. "Threll, your people's data on the hollow's earlier movements. Does it show any pattern of what happens after these moments of instability?" Threll's stone face was tight with concentration as he studied the readings alongside Amara. In the old records, when the hollow suffered any disruption at all, however minor, it always paused briefly to consolidate before continuing. "If your theory holds, Captain, this may be our only chance to strike at its core before it recovers fully." "Whisper, can you identify a core within that instability?" Sarah asked urgently. There was a pause, agonizingly long, before the AI responded. "I believe so, Captain. There is a point of concentrated density near the center of the disruption, unlike anything else in its structure. If Dr. Okafor's theory is correct, that may represent the focal point of whatever process sustains it." "Send those coordinates to the entire fleet," Sarah ordered. "All ships, retarget immediately." Admiral Torres's voice rang out again, relaying the new coordinates across every channel, with an urgency that left no room for hesitation. "All fleets, new target coordinates incoming. Concentrate everything we have on that single point. This may be our only chance." Every ship in the combined fleet retargeted in a matter of seconds and unleashed a final, desperate barrage of everything they had left. Human weapons and alien technology combined in a single, unified strike, aimed at the newly discovered heart of the ancient horror. The response was immediate and violent. The spreading darkness of the hollow convulsed, contracting and expanding in wild, unnatural pulses, sending shockwaves of strange energy rippling outward across the battlefield, shaking every nearby ship to its limits. Alarms blared across the Requiem's bridge as the ship's systems struggled against the strain, but Sarah held her position, watching, waiting, praying that the desperate gamble would pay off. Then, with a final, silent convulsion that defied any normal description, the darkness of the hollow simply stopped. It did not explode. It did not vanish in a flash of light. It simply ceased, the spreading wrongness collapsing inward on itself until nothing remained but ordinary, empty space, the distant stars beyond it, shining once again, undimmed and unbroken. For a long moment, no one on the Requiem's bridge said a word, as if afraid that speaking might somehow undo the impossible thing that had just happened. "Whisper," Sarah finally said, her voice barely above a whisper of her own. "Confirm status of the entity." "I am detecting no trace of the hollow's signature anywhere in the system," Whisper reported. "Sensors show only ordinary space. Captain, I believe it is gone." A cheer began somewhere on the bridge, spreading quickly through the crew, and across every channel connecting the vast, combined fleet, as 3,000 exhausted refugee ships and the entire assembled might of Earth's defense fleet realized, together, that they had done what no one in the Dead Reach galaxy had ever managed in 300 years of trying. They had beaten it, together. Threll turned to Sarah, his stone face carrying an expression that, for the first time since she had met him, looked almost like joy. "Captain Chen," he said quietly, "on behalf of every survivor of the Dead Reach, thank you, not just for bringing us here, but for giving us a chance to finally stand and fight, instead of simply running." Sarah smiled, feeling the exhaustion of the past 2 years finally beginning to lift from her shoulders. "We couldn't have done it without you and your people, Threll. This wasn't a human victory. It was everyone's." In the months that followed, the arrival of the refugee fleet and the destruction of the Hollow changed humanity's place in the galaxy forever. What had begun as a quiet, secretive mission to answer a single terrifying question became, instead, the foundation of the largest, most diverse alliance the galaxy had ever seen. Species that had once hidden in fear, scattered and broken, found new homes among the stars of the Milky Way, welcomed by a species that, until recently, had been considered too young and too unpredictable to be trusted. Earth, once seen as a nervous newcomer to galactic affairs, became known instead as the place that had done what no one else had ever managed, not through overwhelming power or ancient wisdom, but through a simple willingness to listen, to help, and to stand beside strangers when it would have been so much easier and so much safer to simply look away. Sarah Chen, standing once again on the bridge of the Requiem, now permanently docked and repurposed as the flagship of a new combined exploration fleet, looked out at the stars and thought of everything that had happened since that quiet, uncertain day when she had first crossed the threshold into a dead galaxy, searching only for answers. She had found far more than answers. She had found allies and friends, and a new understanding of just how far humanity's reach and humanity's heart could truly extend across the vast, dark silence of the stars. And somewhere out among the countless stars of the galaxy, in ships old and new, human and alien alike, the survivors of the Dead Reach continued their new lives, no longer running, no longer hiding, finally free to build something new together, in a home that had welcomed them not out of obligation, but out of simple, stubborn human kindness.